I'd like to take just a moment to introduce Michael Hickins from the CIO Journal at the Wall Street Journal. He's going to be moderating our panel, our executive leadership panel, working with CIO and the executive board. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Okay, good. Thanks.
What? That was my rather informal way of saying, please join me on stage. So thanks for being with us this morning. I hope that we'll have a very interesting, interactive panel. We're going to leave time at the end for questions. There's microphones here, so as we draw close to the end, if you want to line up at the microphones, that'll be great. I'd like the panelists to introduce themselves, and what I'd like you guys to do is to give us the 2-minute elevator spiel, and then tell us your single, well, maybe not the greatest, but give us one example of an important failure that you led personally and what you learned from it. Mark?
Okay, so my name's Mark Holst-Knudsen. I'm president of ThomasNet.com, and we are actually a fourth-generation family business founded in 1898. Our mission's always been the same throughout the approximate 115-year history of the company, and that's essentially to connect buyers and sellers in the industrial space. On the user side, we have your buying professionals, your procurement professionals, and engineering professionals. And on the supplier side, we have the American supplier in the industrial B2B space looking to serve and sell to those people. So we're most well known for what used to be called affectionately as the Big Green Books. That's the Thomas Register of American Manufacturers. In today's day and age, that's been transformed into a fully online property called ThomasNet.com, which you can check out today. Much more, essentially serves the same function as Thomas Register, but with a lot more capability. As far as my own personal business/technology failure, I would say it revolves around the idea of build versus buy, where I personally was seduced by a build scenario as opposed to a buy scenario, sold the company on it, and it turned out to be a very poor decision.
What made it a poor decision?
Well, there was essentially, commercially available software that could do more or less the same thing, in a much more cost-effective manner, and much more quickly and much more flexibly. It was one of those classic cases where, we thought we were different. Mm-hmm. We thought we had a special requirement that had to be served. In this case, that requirement was, this is actually an order entry system that we're talking about. So in this case, the requirement was for the salesperson in the field to be able to write contracts offline. So we felt that this was critical to their business. We weren't thinking ahead in terms of the age of, tablets and ubiquitous connectivity and so on and so forth. So that required this syncing challenge, which became really a bear for us and too much to handle. So it just cost the company a lot of money and a lot of time when we could have been doing things a lot more flexibly and a lot more cheaply.
So does that mean never again, or are there circumstances where you'd consider building?
Well, definitely, that was a business slap on the wrist for me as far as lessons learned. So I'm definitely going to, it's definitely created sort of a gun-shy attitude to build things unless absolutely necessary. This is an often talked about issue. I think most people are very familiar with it, but really you shouldn't build anything that's available off the shelf because, it's not a source of competitive advantage if everybody else can avail themselves of it. Really the only scenario where you should build is if it's your core technology, the core source of your competitive differentiation and competitive advantage. So,
thank you. Narinder?
Hi, Narinder Singh, co-founder, chief strategy officer at Appirio, president of Topcoder. Appirio is a global cloud consultancy. We're about 1,000 people. We're the leading independent provider of services around Salesforce.com, Google Cornerstone, Workday, and we have about 1,000 people worldwide. But what makes us unique is the Topcoder community. 630,000 developers, designers, and data scientists that we use to crowdsource work for organizations like NASA, where we're helping them find the asteroids, literally, or put a mobile app in space to help track astronaut nutrition, Comcast to help them with digital products, and then organizations across the world that are trying to do design, development, and data science. So my biggest personal failure was I was at WebMethods. I was a hotshot in the, had built a new product that became 30% of our revenue. I thought I kind of walked on water a little bit. And I was given a project that involved integrating 3 different acquisitions and realized very quickly that it was a very different ballgame than trying to create from scratch, and a very painful lesson for me and the company.
So what is the takeaway?
It's funny because I ask this as an interview question all the time, like, give me your biggest failure, and then people try to skirt it. So my big takeaway, a couple things. The first is really understanding the leadership that you put in place and the ability to make tough decisions that nobody's going to be happy with, right? And I think what too often companies do is they have A or B as their paths, and they pick both, not realizing every time you pick both, you're exponentially increasing the difficulty of the initiative. You do that 3 or 4 times, all of a sudden you have something 8 or 16 times more difficult than it should be because you picked both again and again.
Okay, thank you. Peter?
Thanks, Michael. I'm Peter Weill. I'm a faculty member here at the MIT Sloan School of Management. I want to add my personal welcome to all of you to this great event. I'm the chairman of a research center at MIT, which is called CISR, the Center for Information Systems Research, and we basically study one question, work with companies on one question, which is how do you maximize value from digitization? And we have 90 companies around the world we work with. Many of them are in the room, and some of which you'll hear, some of those executives you'll hear from later. My best decision, I'm going to start with that, because I like to balance the positive and the negative, was joining MIT. I think MIT, I'd have to say I died and went to heaven in terms of a place that you can do great research and work with great companies and have impact. The thing that I would do over again if I had a chance is be more ambitious about that impact. And give you a couple of examples. One is I started my career studying how CIOs help govern the technology in their companies. And in fact, where is she? Rebecca Rhodes was one of the first person for a CIO at the time of Raytheon that I worked with on this question. And I would say to you, Rebecca, in hindsight, we looked at this problem too narrowly. We should have looked at all technology in the organization instead of IT, because what we ended up doing, as you can imagine, is creating 3 or 4 separate stacks of spaghetti instead of one big organized set of platforms, hopefully. So I think that's the first thing I would say. And the second thing I would say is not being ambitious enough in helping other companies learn the lessons that many of the leaders like Raytheon have learned. And I don't think we do a good job of that as a community. I think we don't share what our best practices are very openly, and I think as a consequence, we at MIT and companies represented in this room unfortunately make some of the same mistakes over and over again. So I feel bad that we didn't help that process.
All right. Well, maybe this session here will help you make you feel better.
Okay.
Steve?
So good morning, everybody. My name is Steve Neff. I'm the Enterprise Chief Technology Officer for Fidelity Investments. You might have heard of us. We're a local company, and we're one of the largest financial services firms and serve more than 20 million individual customers and plan participants, and probably more than 5,000 institutions and intermediaries, a whole broad set of financial service products, from investment management, retail and institutional brokerage, clearing and settlement, guidance and planning type tools, retirement services, benefits administration, and the like. We are nationwide and global. And I've been there since, for about 18 years now. As far as personal experience, I'll actually give you 2. They're related as far as personal failures. My first job out of college was working for the IBM Corporation, and I was in a branch office in New York for a number of years, but then took a job managing systems professionals in a big IBM data center in Westchester, and we supported all of the field support systems, so the order management systems and accounting and things like that for the branches. This was my first time into management, I didn't have exactly the right skill set required in the group to be doing the kind of projects that we were doing. We were doing a lot of mainframe upgrades at that point. And we started running into some availability issues with the changes we were making. And in particular, there was something called the dreaded memory overlay problem, where a random piece of data just gets dropped in memory someplace and things start crashing. And so there was a technique where you could trace what was going on in the system and look for that particular pattern. And I took the systems guy, so I didn't think we're doing an adequate job. And I got to the console and said, let me do this command. And I got the context just a little bit wrong, and I ended up tracing the entire system for everything. And I brought the entire order entry system for IBM down for, this is in my first management assignment, so. So the first thing I learned was don't touch things, right? But I had a similar experience with my next company where it wasn't me, but I've taken it with me throughout my career. And when I left IBM, I went to Solomon Brothers, which no longer exists, but at the time I was managing a big infrastructure group in New York. And all of our financial systems were running on what we thought was a fairly hardened environment with a pair of servers in one location with mirrored disks that were replicating the backup to another site with, just so we had data everywhere. You need to test this stuff. You need to make sure that the backups are running, that the infrastructure is there. You might think that things are running, but we ended up having a data corruption issue where the mirrored system wasn't working properly. And where the alternate site hadn't been upgraded to the latest version of some piece of software, and because of that, the entire backup was failing every night, and nobody was watching it. So we had primary down, backup, hot backup down, and tertiary backup in another part of the country down, just as we had a quarter end and trying to report the financials for the firm. And we literally had to get a company, one of these specialty companies, that takes the disk and literally takes the bits off and recreates it someplace else, and we got through it. But what I learned was, stability is not a given. You might think you're stable, but you've got to test this stuff rigorously, end to end, constantly. And everywhere I've gone, every role I've had, I've tried to build that into the notion of stability is not a given.
And today, where everyone is sort of taking that as table stakes, that's still something that
absolutely.
That needs to be.
Operational excellence in our industry is table stakes. It's the cost to get in the game.
So actually, that leads to a question I'll have for Narinder later. But one of the topics of this panel discussion is the relationship between boards of directors and CIOs, and more generally between executive management and technology executive management, and whether the CIO is actually at the table or not. There's still that distinction, at least in the minds of a lot of people. In the aftermath of Snowden and the Target failure, it seems that technology has certainly become more of a topic of conversation at the board level. Peter, I was wondering if you could talk to me a little bit about that. Is the interest limited to security topics, or are CIOs still just being called on the carpet to promise that the systems are invulnerable, or are boards generally suddenly more aware of the potential for IT not only to protect but also potentially to be what you might call an offensive weapon and actually drive new revenue?
Yeah, that's just been a huge change. I would say, just a personal story, we at MIT CISR are about to celebrate our 40th birthday, and until 2 years ago, we had done very few board sessions. We've done 15 since then, and the reason, and it used to be when we did them, my job was to go and terrify the board, and say, these are all the things that could go wrong, right? And now, the big issue that I hear about, data security is important, uptime, penetration, all those things are important. But the big issue I hear every time we talk to boards is what is the risk and opportunity to our business model? How are we going to make money from technology? You know, how will disruption change the way we make money? Banks, insurance companies, defense companies, software companies, media companies, just a huge set of questions. And so I'm finding boards and executive committees, if you think of them as the one level below that with the CEO and their direct reports, much more active on that conversation, much more interested in talking about how companies that are traditionally outside their industry will make inroads. And an example, I was in Australia earlier this year. One of the big supermarket chains in Australia called Coles sold more insurance, or at least equal amount of insurance, than any of the leading insurance companies for the first time. And that really said it's no longer the industry vertical that we have to worry about. It's digitization changes what we think of as an industry, and customer experience really drives whether we can sell other products. So that leads the board to ask, how good's our experience? How do we move more from a value chain of running our own company to an ecosystem, a bit like Fidelity. You're more of an ecosystem than a vertical. So they're the kind of conversations that we're hearing, and they're very healthy debates, very strong debates.
So Steve, Fidelity is an unusually structured organization. Can you explain to us a little bit how, what the management structure is like and how IT works within that, and
Sure. So first of all, we are a distributed IT function. So the bulk of the technologists report into the business lines, into CIOs that have a dual reporting relationship. And what I do is manage all of the core services at the center, the infrastructure and security and risk and a lot of the corporate services. And then collectively, as a group, we manage the function. The CIOs and myself have a CIO council. And we manage where we're going from a vision standpoint. We manage all of the cross-company type initiatives where we need consistency, where we need leverage. And it's really the notion of wearing two hats. Everybody wears two hats. You wear a hat that's very specific to the function that you're in or the business line that you're in, and you wear the broad Fidelity hat, what is right for this firm as a whole.
So who has the dialogue with the executive committee or the board?
So I'm on the executive committee, and so we sit as a group on a regular basis. And we'll talk. We don't typically talk about individual business problems. We talk about the broader topics about consistency and what's the vision for the company and how does technology play in.
And would you say that things have changed in the last year?
Well, I think we're a little bit spoiled because we've always had pretty heavy engagement in a proactive way from the senior executives of the firm. Technology has never been kind of off to the side, the glass house that you have to just put up with. There's been really an integration into the business lines for a long time.
Okay.
Michael, I think this comes down to the existential hope versus fear question, right? And I'm more of a hope guy in general, and I used to go into organizations and say, look, if you get all these cool new technologies, look what you could accomplish, right? And that works pretty well until somebody's afraid, right? And they start seeing security. And so now what I think Peter's saying, in some ways, it's not hope versus fear, it's fear versus fear. It's fear of security and penetration versus fear of disruption, that technology is just going to eat your lunch. And that really is the kinds of conversations that have risen. It's interesting, and if you look at Warren Buffett just had his annual meeting in Omaha, and one of the questions raised was, they obviously own Geico, was what do you think is going to happen with automated cars like Google Car and the insurance industry? How profound is it that at Warren Buffett's annual meeting that this is a question now, right? That this is not just a toy or something on the side. And so I think that really is the driver today, where it's not hope versus fear. It really is fear of disruption through technology because software really is eating the world, versus fear of we can't screw something else because I don't want to become the next CEO who gets fired because of a broad negligence.
And so, have you seen internally a change in the expectations of your board towards you?
So a little bit different. So I'm on our board of directors, and our board consists of venture capitalists like Sequoia, GGV and General Atlantic. And so we're a provider, right? So for us, there's definitely a bias towards pace, but we share board members with companies like HP, Citibank, Box, et cetera. And what you find is that there's definitely a recognition that the buying environment has to at least be aware of that, and there's going to be a temporary retreat. We think in retail there's going to be a temporary retreat from innovation, and I think real leadership would say, no, there's risk, but let me appropriately measure risk versus over-respond to that risk. And that, to me, will be what separates real leaders from people who are just trying to protect and make sure they don't get noticed through a turbulent time.
So Mark, you're in a unique position. You're the CEO and the CTO. Who says no?
Well, of course, the board can say no to anything they'd like. But for our board of directors, I would say, as far as the fear versus hope equation, it's pretty much 99% fear. And the reason for that is for most of the company's history, they've enjoyed, this cash cow book, that for most of the company's history. So in the 90s, when all the fun started happening with the internet, we knew that the books days were going to come to an end. So for a board member, that's used to the past is a pretty scary prospect, obviously, and how the heck are we going to deal with it, and so on and so forth. So I would say, that as far as the perspective of the board, it's basically been, becoming comfortable with that fear. And really relying on folks like myself and my core team to really help them understand where the company is going and how we're going to deal with all this, and so on and so forth.
Earlier, Lindsay was talking about if you're the smartest person in the room, you're probably not getting very good advice. How do you ensure that you're getting good advice? I mean, I know that your background, you've got a music background and you've got a business background, and obviously you've been leading IT for 10 years, so it's not like you don't have an IT background, but you don't have that core training. First of all, I mean, do you find that to be a hindrance, and how do you compensate for the gaps in your knowledge? How do you ensure that you're getting the right kind of advice?
Well, I can definitely assure you that I'm not the smartest person in the room at any given time, so we don't have to worry about that. As far as getting advice, you have to, it's a matter of attitude, the attitude that you show towards other people. I mean, you really have to internally be willing to be wrong as many times as possible. You should never, ever grasp onto any of your own ideas as, religious in nature, that you'll never let them go, no matter what. So you really, it's a matter of setting a tone throughout an organization that anybody can come into my office at any time and say whatever they'd like without fear of repercussions. Ideas are welcome. Everyone should have an open door policy. And in fact, if a day goes by where I don't get yelled at in some way by somebody within the company, then I'm probably not doing a good job. So again, it's just a matter of attitude and tone setting and helping everyone feel comfortable with ideas, promoting that kind of environment. So.
Michael, can I just add a little data to this conversation about
absolutely.
boards? We're doing a study right now at CISR on board effectiveness and how often CIOs present. So there's a live poll on our website. If you go to MIT CISR, search for that. And the good thing about the live poll is you can see the results as they're coming up by entering the data. So I can give you the data. It only went up a couple of days ago. We have 45 responses so far, so we'd like to increase that. But the question is, how often does your CIO present to the board of directors? There's two questions. That's the first. And 9% of companies never. And at the other end of the extreme, 42% of companies, not every meeting, but once a year. And then in terms of the data in the middle, 29% of CIOs at every meeting, and 20% of CIOs once a year. So that's
do you know what those numbers were a year ago?
I don't, no, but they would have been less. And the topics that they were talking about, which I think are very relevant for this conversation, were that, and you could check more than one, 28% of the respondents said major transformation projects were a really huge issue. And then spending, really big issue. 20% said we talk about spending at every time we meet. And then the rest are risk, of technology, IT risk, and the impact, the 17%, and the impact of digitization on the business model, 15%. And I thought that was quite low, and it must be a consequence of industries or different perspectives of how technology can change.
Well, you know, I wanted to ask you, because you're the wise man of the
I
panel.
don't know about that.
Well, Mark says he's definitely not, and I'm not going to ask Narinder. Tell me, or tell our audience rather, what is digitization really? And more specifically, does it have to do only with customer-facing stuff? Or is digitization a broader issue?
So that's a great question. We have a formal definition of digitization. I won't read it to you.
Oh, thank God.
But what I will tell you is I think there's 3 bits to it that every company has to think about. The first is that companies are no longer value chains that they control. So think about Walmart. It controls its value chain. It controls its pricing, the stores, what products are in the stores. If you think about an Amazon or a Fidelity, they are now ecosystems that plug and play with other companies. You can buy other products on the Fidelity site that they don't manufacture or produce. So that's the number 1 change. And that's a mindset change and a big change in the way companies make money. The second is we think digitization is everywhere. And one way to think about that is the Internet of Things. But that means that everything from mining, where we work with a company called Tech Resources, where there's a big effort to integrate all the mining systems and improve safety, to GE, who's thinking about integrating their manufacturing right through to delivery. So it's not customer-facing only, although that's where a lot of the attention is. To do that, you have to think about the integration of all of the components of your ecosystem. Some of that's inside your company, some of that's outside. So that's the second piece. And the third piece is, I think technology drives amazing innovation for new products. And one of the organizations that we work with is France Telecom, that has a product called Orange Money, which is peer-to-peer payments in Africa for the unbanked. And this has grown amazingly, and it's a brand new product. Most of those folks have never been in a bank, but now can do transfer of money and more products over time. So they're the 3 things I think digitization drives. I wouldn't worry about the definition. I think it drives value chains to ecosystems. It drives connectivity, Internet of Things, connections, and really interesting new product innovation.
Let me take an orthogonal cut at this for a second.
Sure.
So I think, we've historically, what I would say, and I still love Marc Andreessen's Software's Eating the World piece in the Wall Street Journal from a couple years ago. No plug intended. But the thing is that was a lot about, how Netflix is disrupting Blockbuster, et cetera, products that, you can see the substitution of a product for a digital product. I think what's happening now is a much broader set of phenomenon. We're seeing 3D printing is going to upend manufacturing. Invisalign, every pair of braces from Invisalign are 3D printed. The shoes in the Super Bowl were 3D printed. You can 3D print food. It's going to change manufacturing, logistics, et cetera. Wearables, you look at all the wearable devices that are out there, what they mean for collecting information on you, from Google Glass to all the fitness pieces, dramatic impact on healthcare. You look at automation, robotics, saying what's going to happen when you don't have to outsource jobs to people, you just outsource them to robots. How does that shift through things? What's happening with all these things, it's a broader technology shift, but all of those shifts are backed by the world is becoming programmable. So now it's not just digital products, it's all products. The world is becoming programmable and data is exploding. So those 2 things in combination now mean that software is eating the world applies not just to industries which products could get digitized in, but to every industry. And I think that's the really compelling piece for how you have to be able to think differently as an organization, because it's not these incremental changes that are going to upend you. It's how are you going to deal with ones where it's hundreds, orders of magnitude difference in how things are done that's going to be dramatically disruptive to you and your industry.
Steve, I know that you wanted to jump in.
A couple things. This dialogue has actually been great, and eventually I want to come back to the, are we dealing with fear or are we dealing with hope, and how do you run a business these days when you kind of have both of these ends of the spectrum? But for us, the barriers to entry for our industry are rapidly coming down, right? And that's one big change that we're seeing. You can start a company, I think Amazon has now 100,000 businesses that have started on AWS in the life of the company, which is less than 10 years, right? So you can get into an industry, you can build product, you can buy product, you can assemble these things much more rapidly, you can offer services much more rapidly, and what it's forcing us to do is to think about, where in the broad ecosystem can we play, right? Where can our business have value and add value to clients and customers who may be our customers today, or they may not be. I mean, a great example would be in China, Alibaba now, less than a year ago, bought a little bank, right? And they opened a money market fund, and within 6 months, they've got 20 some odd million customers and 20 billion in assets. They weren't in the business less than a year ago. So things like that are happening all around financial services. I think the other thing which has been very important for us is the customer experience. We used to try to shape the customer experience for our own customers, right? And now there is this linkage between the rest of their world and the experience they're seeing with, all the other places that they go. They view that. So it's almost like others wrestled our customers from us, gave them a new experience, and now we are rapidly trying to keep up with that and actually surpass that with the investments that we're making. And so the notion of mobile, the notion of collaboration, the notion of a dramatic amount of personalization, doing things in the context of things that I did before, right? All of that is being a basic premise for what a good customer experience is. This is now built in. We have to build this into our ecosystem. So, but it is, if you look at, is there hope or is there fear? We're driving with, there is incredible amount of opportunity that it provides, and you can't run a business out of fear. Now, we spend a lot of time, right, the executive leadership of the firm, focusing on technology risk, focusing on security and the like, to make sure that we're doing scenario planning and we have, the right level of infrastructure to support the possible dangers. But we're very much looking at this as a positive development.
Mark?
Yeah, barriers to entry lowering is a huge theme in our business as well. In the book days, again, it was very hard to recreate that. But in today's day and age, it's quite easy to go onto our site and scrape it for supplier listings and put up something roughly comparable. And that's actually been done before. So the question for us is, how do we differentiate from the basic supplier directory? And that goes into a whole variety of different things. A lot of it has to do with the human touch component. We have services where a buyer can actually work with us on a consulting basis to find the right type of custom manufacturing process for their need, for example. That's something that does take some level of expertise. So yeah, barriers to entry lowering is a huge issue. You also had talked about internal technology, what technology is customer-facing versus what technology is not customer-facing. And I actually think that that's not necessarily the right way to look at it, because if you really think about it, there is no technology that you can implement in a company that doesn't touch or affect the customer in some way. And if it doesn't touch or affect the customer in some way, then what are you doing it for? You have to ask that question. A simple example would be, something as simple as a billing system, the way that you bill your customers and the technology that goes behind that. If you get that wrong and you create a customer frustration about a bill they receive and they don't understand what it means or it comes at the wrong time, that can create a level of frustration and you can lose customers over something that seemingly isn't that customer facing. It really is.
So beyond copycats and barriers to entry, what do you see as the potential looming threat from a digital disruptor?
Well, for us, it's the advent of the modern search engine. That's the big disruptor. Because Google has such, and the search engines, particularly Google, they're the big gorilla, has such amazing data on the user that they can create quite targeted advertising. So typically when we're in front of a prospect, it's usually why should I be advertising with you when I should just be doing pay-per-click or just be doing search engine optimization and so on and so forth. So that has been and continues to be the major disruptor in our space. So for us, we really, for an engineering and procurement professional, their need goes far beyond, what the general search engine can provide. So for example, if you're a design engineer, it's not good enough to just go to a search box and type in, DC brushless motor. You're going to actually want to pull up a 3D CAD model of that DC brushless motor, rotate it, visualize it right there in the web browser, and then download if that's the right product. You're going to want to download that directly into the design that you're working on. So that's where we come in, and that's where we can do things that go well beyond the capabilities of a general search engine for this specific niche.
Michael, let me give you the position of a disruptor, like a hopeful disruptor, right? So Appirio, like I said, about 1,000 people, but we compete with companies like Deloitte and Accenture who have 250,000 people. At some point, we realized that my grandchildren would be dead and buried before we hired enough people to compete, right? So what do? We said we're going to set up a community. We top coder 630,000 people. Google and Facebook hire from us. We have no staffing delay. We don't have to interview 200,000 people a year just to keep flat in our hiring growth. We're able to go on and say we're going to take on projects like helping NASA find asteroids better. And it's because we're approaching the problem completely differently. Now, we could be wrong, for sure, right? And we may not be successful in this, though I would hope we are. But the point is, we're able to take all the chips and push them to the middle of the table. And now there's probably 10 other companies like us who are pushing in chips from different angles, right? They're doing things differently. As the incumbent, you have to deal with 10 different people who are trying to disrupt you from 10 different ways who are pushing all their chips to the center of the table. And I think that is a really difficult thing. So how do you set up a structure? For our large customers, we say, how do you set up a structure that lets you're not going to push all your chips in the middle, but you need the equivalent of that to be able to deal with disruptors who are going to approach things from a very different set of perspectives. And to me, that's a conversation that the board has to be able to create a structure that enables large organizations to do, because historically it's not been possible.
So that's an interesting segue to what I was going to ask Steve next. I know that in addition to keeping the servers running, one of the functions of IT at Fidelity is you actually create IT products that you sell. And so there's a lot of talk now about agility in IT. Right? Agile has become the new cloud. It's the thing that everyone's talking about, and you've got Scrum Masters everywhere. But how do you make the business agile? How do you work with the business so that they have the same agile capabilities that the IT team does?
So I would start with our basic organizational model was set up that way intentionally, right? So we want the best of both worlds, right? We want the bulk of the technologists embedded in a business, close to the action, having the dialogue on a day in and day out basis, and able to do agile development with strong participation, right? We also want things to be done consistently so we get the economies of scale and the leverage where we can, right? This goes back to the notion of all the CIOs wear two hats. We are a heavy adopter of Agile for much of all of our new development, but for much of the development on the newer platforms. And across every business line, we have pretty strong participation in the whole process. We also have a number of cases where multiple businesses are involved, right? So our retail organization and our workplace investing organization have a number of the end customers are crossover between those two worlds. They've got a retail account with us, they've got their 401k through a plan sponsor with us. They want the same experience, they want the same guidance and planning tools, they want the same view of their interaction, regardless of what side of the house they're on. So it forces the businesses and their technology units to cross business lines and do things together. So there's a lot of sponsorship for that kind of activity from the top of the house. If you don't have it from the top of the house, this is when you go off in different directions. So we spend much of our time with that. It's all about alignment. Alignment between technology and business, alignment between the different technology groups, and in our particular case, alignment on a global basis because we've got a number of locations in the US and in 3 countries overseas. So getting everybody on the same page for whatever it is that we're trying to build or deliver is kind of a message from the top.
But I mean, we've been talking about, and you've probably been talking about internally alignment for 15 years now, right? How do you get that alignment at a much faster pace? Because you've got, typically your executive committee is risk averse. They want to go slowly. They want to vet things. They want to think through business plans. I mean, Peter, did you want to say something about that?
I just want to try and draw these two thoughts together from Steve and Narinder. You talk about disruption and you talk about customer experience, and I think that those two issues really resonate with me. The defense to disruption is to be great. And the question is what to be great at. And we think in a digital world, there's really only three things you can be great at. One is the products and information that you have. You know, your advice, I love your portfolio management stuff, right? So that's products and advice. The second is multi-product customer experience, right? Which is hard to do in a company the size of yours and hard to do in a company of the size of many, easier to do in yours, but that is what the great companies do. And so one of the companies we work with is called USAA, a bank here. The net promoter score for the average in the banking industry last year, net promoter score meaning whether you're a promoter or a detractor, goes from plus 100 to minus 100, is 17. 17% of banking customers would net promote to a friend their bank. USAA is 87. And so what that tells you is it's doable, right?
Absolutely.
And so that's the second source of competitive advantage. And the third is platforms, how to deliver these new products and services and existing ones in a fun, friendly, integrated kind of way. So what we challenge boards when we talk to them about is, so how good are you at those three? Which are going to be your sources of competitive advantage going forwards, and how will that help fight off the disruptors or partner with the disruptors?
But you have to be framed right? Like Blockbuster probably had great customer service, great support, et cetera, but if they're framed in the elements that the world that they know, then I think they end up in a situation where they're going to achieve a local maxima to that problem. And I think that's the issue of how do you help large organizations, like we talk to our customers all the time, which are almost all enterprises, about us escaping the local maxima, right? Like it's very easy to say, in the range of what we understand, we're doing the best that we can, but it's the question of today, the range of what you don't understand or is outside, I think has the ability to really have people setting goals that are locally maximized versus thinking about the broader stuff.
Right, locally maximized is a good way to say it. Blockbuster weren't good at any of the three. They didn't have great customer experience, they didn't have platforms to deliver on demand, and they had limited availability in the store. So they might have said locally maxima great in their worldview, but in the view of the disruption, they didn't, right? So I think your point is absolutely right. You've got to see the bigger picture, and you've got to have brutal assessment of how good you are at each of those three, relative not to current competitors.
On an absolute scale versus
exactly. I think we're agreeing vehemently.
Well, I would tell you that we have a simple strategy. Okay, it's not easy to execute, but it's fairly simple, and it goes like this: we try to achieve and deliver consistently the best customer experience in the industry, right? And there's ways that we define that.
How do you measure it?
We measure it a lot of different ways. Net Promoter Score is one of the ways. Sure, lots of different ways to it. But best customer experience as it had been defined traditionally, and now as it's being defined in a much broader scale with all the hyperscale internet players, and like the new experiences, right? So best customer experience, we now look at delivering solutions that are based on outcomes, as opposed to an individual security, the performance of a mutual fund, a composite these are all nice, they're all lower level things to measure, but what customers need are the outcomes that they're looking for. And so solutions that deliver those outcomes, to do it at scale, because we have to do it at scale in order to have the right price point. And the fourth pillar in our strategy is to use technology to do it. So, and at the board level and below, this is how technology gets overlaid into every business line and then across the company. So it starts with that kind of simple premise as to where we play.
So we have a few minutes left, so I just wanted to encourage anyone who had any questions to come forward to the microphones. And in the meantime, I just wanted to come back one more time to something that we started talking about, which was the whole build versus buy dilemma. A couple of weeks ago at CIO Journal, we reported that Tesla is building their own ERP system, or has actually built their own ERP system. And today we reported that Facebook is building their own CRM system. What do at this particular moment in time, do you guys see a swing in the pendulum back from packaged software that's vanilla and best of breed, as opposed to customized solutions. And to Mark, you earlier said that you would do if that's competitive advantage. For you, what would that be?
Well, for competitive advantages, what is the functionality that we provide to the end user, the engineering and procurement professional? It's also the reporting mechanisms that demonstrate return on investment to the advertiser. And then there's probably the most significant is the systems that we use to manage product information and CAD information. The ability to create a product catalog with, describe a product with 40 different specifications, and to be able to translate those specifications so that you can syndicate that data to a large distributor, a small distributor, different ERP system requirements to consume that data, or to different marketplaces where other buyers that aren't ThomasNet buyers might be able to view that data. So it's product information management is a huge area.
In the
proprietary technology.
Earlier, you talked about someone going to your site and being able to consume a 3D rendering.
Yeah.
Is that a technology you developed internally?
Yes, absolutely. And the main difference is obviously there are many CAD systems out there, but these are desktop design systems, whereas our CAD technology is more a marketing-focused technology. What it needs to be able to do is create a relatively simple envelope drawing as opposed to a detailed engineering drawing, and to be able to export that into multiple formats, because you're not going to know which CAD system the end user is going to be using at the time they want to consume that drawing. So yes, that's proprietary.
Interesting. Narinder?
So build versus buy, I think you got to de-aggregate the problem. There's a few things happening. First of all, it's gotten easier to build than it's ever been before, right? Because cloud systems and the like. Second point is buy solutions that are cloud-based are faster evolving than ever before, so that would say buy. And then third is that there's so many more technology gaps so that there's not standard solutions for these emerging areas. So those are three major factors that refactor what build versus buy looks like. I don't think it's swung to one or the other, but I will say in newer areas, if you're trying to build a solution that connects wearables to your CRM system, probably you're going to have to do some building. But you don't want to rebuild the whole piece of it. And so I think those kinds of dynamics are what we're seeing come to play more and more at these unique companies especially.
Hey, we have a question here I'd like to get to.
Good morning, first of all. A great session to enrich the morning for everyone over here. It's a great session where we are discussing about the fight between hope and fear, disruption and agility between the business and IT. How do you suggest we handle a scenario where when we are fighting this battle between hope and fear, and there are big data technologies going on, and data breaches that are a lot more disruptive than new technologies sometimes? And if you look at the big companies, the Fortune 500 companies, and how many of those companies have got board-level representation of IT executives who can actually educate the board on what all things to do to avoid these kind of data breaches, because every data breach sets us back at least few years, if not more, because it creates fear in consumers' mind. So if you can talk about that, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
I mean, I started with hope and fear, so I guess I'll finish with it. I mean, I think one thing is when I was a younger man, I would keep pushing hope. Now I'm like, you got to fight a little bit of fear with fear. And I really do think if I was in an industry and talking about securities coming up, so the fear of breaches is there already, you have to see what people are doing. Like hearing some of the stories that Peter and Stephen told about what was happening in other industries, the like, saying there is real potential for disruption if we let this kind of fear paralyze us. Right? So at least neutralizing it, and then say, okay, now we have to have an educated discussion about risk-adjusted rate of return, right? It's the concept very familiar to the financial industries, but I feel like we don't bring it enough into technology and IT, where we say, look, we need to innovate in a smart way. We need to have appropriate level of fear, not disproportionate. It can't be paralyzing. Fear can inspire great performance, but it also can be paralyzing. And so at least you have to get to where you can have a conversation around that. And that's very difficult to do when the only thing you see is the target CEO got fired because their IT screwed up. That's the punchline. So, and if you can't break through that, you can't have a rational conversation, because that will always skew.
And we have one more question here.
So thinking about becoming an agile enterprise, how do you thread the needle from the business side to the technology side that the technology people don't want to tell you what they're going to build because it's agile. We're going to decide as we go, versus the business side wanting to know what they're actually paying for.
So I would say that even in an agile development scenario, you still have a vision, you still have a target of where you're going. What the short-term deliverables are may be rapidly evolving, but if you don't have that target, then you're kind of building like this, right? That's the wrong way to do agile. So most business people, if they're involved from the beginning in a big way, can be comfortable with that.
Okay.
To focus on the outcomes.
Yeah, it's about outcomes.
That's what you're saying.
A great example of agile is mobile products and services. And I think one of the things we've learned in studying and working with companies on building mobile apps, for example, is that it's very much, as Narinder was saying, it's about modular reuse as opposed to build buy. So it's a more nuanced conversation now. It says, we have a billing system, we have a system for developing credit scoring or whatever it might be. We're going to reuse those every time we have a product that calls on them. But the new stuff, the customer facing, we're going to invest heavily in design. So more IT organizations I talk to every day are saying we need really cool design capability, both internally and externally. And so what that says is we'll be more disciplined about reusing what we have and therefore faster to market, more agile. So the promise of agility, which we've been talking about for a long time, is that you build the last Lego block as the cool interface, and it connects to things that the technology organization has standardized and made sure works really well and reused.
The other thing is you have to buy into, to get that kind of agile process, you have to buy into the whole concept of the infrastructure layer, the platform layer, the data layer, are things that you need to do once on behalf of everybody and get the developers out of that game. So you're not even having that dialogue. It's all about business capability at that point.
I think the two things is like, if you can fixate on what's the minimum viable product, which is something every startup uses, and what's the outcome you're trying to achieve, you can thread that needle.
So how do you actually describe to your direct reports, here's the minimum that I need from you for me to sign off on the business side and say, we're actually going to do this effort?
I mean, for me, when I'm talking to people on my team, I say, what's the minimum that's going to get delivered? And I think what people start with is the minimum turns into the requirements documents that's 600 pages, right? Not really what's the core of what we need, and that we can't embarrass our brand in the market. And I think really getting focused on that allows that conversation to then go, if they can identify what that is, I have a trust that they're going to direct the ship in the way that makes sense. If that turns into the 700 pages, then actually, you dig deeper. It's like, I think it's the Rolling Stones or some band used to ask for a green M&Ms next to their thing. Yeah. And they did it because they were like, we knew if that was there, the pyrotechnics of the show were going to be okay, right? Yeah. So it was the light bulb for them to be able to understand that they actually read the 100-page contract. So I think you got to find a thing like that to make sure that you've got a proxy for things are in control and there's trust that's there.
I would argue that's great, but demo or die. Basically.
Yeah.
Show me what it's going to look like, and then I'll sign off on it. I mean, I think that is what we do today, and I think the business case and the document you described it is an old way of thinking about it. So, show me what it's going to look like before we agree to.
All right, well, I've been told that we're out of time, so I have time for one more question. Are there any other questions? Yes, go ahead, please.
What inspires you guys as IT leaders?
Boy, I'll tell you, if you can't get psyched in financial services right now with where the technology is and where the business is, go get another job. Right, so I'm just being in that environment is about as invigorating as it gets.
Well, I would say, again, it's the result for the end customer when you do something great for somebody that enhances their life, and they tell you about it. For example, we have many examples right throughout the history of our company of suppliers sending us the testimonial where they say, we started in a garage, me and my partner, and because of advertising in your directory or participating on your website, we were able to grow our company. Now we have 38 people working for us, and we're in a 38,000-foot facility. and we've become a $10 million company. I mean, stories like that are what drive me personally, and what I think also drives the organization towards higher performance, to create more of those types of stories.
What inspires me is that I probably have a career typical of a lot of folks who started on the technology side and struggled to get to the business side, went to a big business school, went into corporate strategy, and basically now seeing the world where you don't have to do that anymore. As a technologist, you have the ability to affect all aspects of almost every element of society. And there's an approach to do that without the arrogance that's sometimes associated with the Valley, but it's such an inspiring thing to say you really can have a profound impact on any business in any place. We're in that kind of time. And to me, that's an incredibly inspiring place to be.
So I love that view of the startup, Narinder, and I think that's where there's a lot of growth. But I love the problems of large companies. I just think they're absolutely fascinating, and it's where I've spent my whole career. And if we can't make a difference in 2014, where digitization's on everybody's lips, we're really not trying. So I think instead of hope and fear, it's got to be about greed and fear. It's got to be about how we actually really make a difference. And it feels to me we're just starting to do that. And one of the, I think, indicators of that is it's hard to tell in the great companies where the IT organization ends and the rest of the organization begins. And I think that's going to get more and more so over time. And for us, so it's a great time to be, I've been in technology all my life, it's a great time to be in this field because we're finally, I think, doing the business model issues that really matter.
Great.
Thank you. This was a great discussion. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Please, let's thank our panel members. We had a great discussion today. And on behalf of MIT Sloan, Boston Alumni Association, and MIT Center of Digital Business, I want to give an appreciation token of appreciation for the panel members. Thanks.